Welcome back, guys. It's been a couple days because I had to order a 1/4-inch torque wrench to be able to start tightening the cam tower back down. I used to have a 1/4-inch torque wrench some time ago, but like the head on it exploded for some reason, and the smallest torque wrench that I currently had was a 3/8, and it went from I think 20 to 120 foot-pounds, and we've got to torque these bolts that I just put back in. This one, the 10 bolts that I just put back in, they have to be torqued back down to 8.11 foot-pounds or 11 Newton meters. What I wound up buying was a inch-pound. It's a Tecton 1/4-inch drive. It's just a overall smaller torque wrench, so that'll make it easier to get in here. And I have it set for, I think, like, well, if you take 8.11 foot-pounds and times it by 12, I think you come up to like 97.3 inch-pounds. So I've got it set for oh, look at that shit. It's got Newton meters over here. And it is somewhere between 10.7 and 12.4 Newton meters. Inch pounds, it is at, so we're past 95. So 1, 2, we're just a little bit past 97. So I'm gonna call that, with my calibrated eye, 97.3. So I'm gonna go through and torque these down. The last video, I was kind of being a shithead and I said I wasn't gonna share the image from the service manual that tells you how to torque these down, the sequence. And I'm still not going to share that with you because it is copyrighted material. But as long as I don't share that image, I'm not sharing that copyrighted material. I'm just sharing my knowledge. So let's go through the sequence that you will need to do. Wonder, can you see all of this? So right now I'm just using the magnet that's built into my Osmo Action 4. I think you should, okay, so these are the bolts. I'm gonna call this the center bolts on the cam tower. Okay, so alright, so if you look in the service manual, they have the bolts lettered, even though on the cam tower they have them numbered, which I think is weird. So the tightening sequence is A, B, C, D. Alright, then from D, you're going to come all the way over to this corner over here. You probably can't see it, but it's a very the closest to you right hand corner, that's going to be E. The next one is the one opposite diagonally of it, that's F. Okay, then you're going to go all the way to the corner to the right of that one over here, that is G. And then the very far back left hand corner is H. And then from there you go to the very front center, and then after you tighten that one, you go to the very back center. And they skip a bunch of letters and they call that one L. I wonder if they did that because it's the last one. I don't know. They skipped H, I, G, J. They skipped J, K, and L. So that almost has to be that they meant that to be the last one. I don't know. But that's your pull that back up. That's your torque tightening pattern. A, B, C, D, all the way, back right corner, E, opposite corner, F, G, H, I, and then the very back center one is L. This might be a little unnecessary, but I'm just going to run through and run each bolt down and just kind of get it snug with the long end and give it just a little bit with the short end. 8 foot-pounds is not much. I mean, I could probably get it close without the torque wrench, but you know, fancy Italian motor, I'm not going to take any chances with it. So a little snug with the long end, just a little bit more snug with the thing there, and then I'm going to go through and start actually torquing them in the order I just told you. Son of a bitch. God damn, it landed on the fucking lens too, didn't it? It's okay. Try to get you in the shot, maybe. Okay. Yeah, you can say that. So I'm on G, I think, and pretty much all I'm doing, once I get the bolt to torque, I just very carefully check it 3 times. The only reason I do that is because I've watched some videos of like Billy Bolt's mechanics working on, you know, whenever they put their rear axle nuts or whatever on, they check the click 3 times before they move on to the next thing. Okay, all 10 of the camshaft tower bolts are torqued. So now I have to go back through and I got to pin the exhaust cam back out, and I have to put the, turn this down a little bit, I have to put the tool back on the intake camshaft, and then I have to use it to put the valve thrust back in. So after I put the tool on, I have a 1/2-inch breaker bar this time. Pretty much what I have to do is spin this camshaft hole here counterclockwise until you can kind of see it through this hole right here, until it lines up with that hole there. And then after I do that, I need to take my drill bit and I have to hold it and stick this back in there to hold it. Then after I get it back in, then I can put the intake cam gear back on, and then I can lace the timing chain back on. We'll go over that when I get there. But then after I do that, then I have to put the tensioner back in, and then I can, after I get the tensioner back in and everything looks good, I can double check my measurements before I proceed to figure out if I can continue putting the bike back together. All right, let's put this cam thrust back in, and so you know what I'm doing. I am turning this counterclockwise or anti-clockwise, whatever you want to call it, until I can get this drill bit and this hole right there. And I'm gonna try not to overshoot it. So time to do the whole flashlight mouth routine. Okay, so it feels like it's getting a little bit easier. Like you have to put a little bit of torque on it. Right. So when I got it to that point, I just kind of had to wiggle this back and forth and keep putting pressure, pushing that way, and kind of wiggling at the same time until I got the pin to go in. So now the intake camshaft is pinned back out to the motor. Cool. I like this. There's no bangs, there's no zzzz. It was just nice and smooth. It felt like how it should have worked. Okay. Awesome. I should also note that if you're ordering parts, like when you buy the 12,000 mile service kit, they don't sell you everything that you need if you actually have to do a valve if you have to change the shims on your valves. They sell you the parts to check the valves, and that's it. Like they're assuming that your valves won't need serviced. If you do wind up, man, I'm sucking at talking tonight. If you do wind up having to change your valve shims, then there are some other parts that will have to be ordered, and I will go over. I got to go through the service manual some more to make sure there's nothing that I'm missing. But obviously, like all the hoses that got the what are they called? This style clamp here, the squeeze clamp. Apparently, this is called like an Oetiker clamp. You can purchase kits online. I found one on Amazon for like $25, and it came with the crimper tool, and it was anywhere from like 6 millimeters to I think just shy of an inch. So that should cover most of the hoses that I had to cut. But if you do have to take the intake camshaft loose, you have to order new bolts for it. I'm just using the old bolts for my special tool here, and I did wind up ordering new bolts, and the only time I'm gonna put them on is when I'm ready to close this thing up. I know everything is good. There's also down here on the camshaft, or the timing chain tensioner, there's a washer and a O-ring that has to be replaced if you take this loose. Obviously your valve cover gasket but the valve cover stuff should all come in the kit that comes from AF1's 12,000 mile service kit. And in this instance, I'm only talking about the extra things that you need to order if you have to actually service the valves. That's the main things. I don't want to dig in my box of parts to find the cam chain tensioner right now. So we'll talk about that more because now this thing is pinned back out. The next step is I've got to get the chain slung correctly. So, I mean, if you don't know what's going on, this is your timing chain down here. It is attached to your crank cam. That's why we have to pin this out when we do this, is to make sure that the crank doesn't move, right? So tomorrow, whenever I get back to this, I have to take my special tool back off. I have to put just for now, I'm just going to put the original intake camshaft gear back on here, right? And then I've got to pull the slack from this timing chain up from the camshaft down, or the crankshaft down here, right? And I don't want to have any slack between the crankshaft gear and the intake shaft gear. And I don't want to have any slack between the intake camshaft gear to the exhaust camshaft gear. I'll edit this out if I didn't cover this before, but I'm pretty sure I did. So right now, the crankshaft has been pinned out from the moment we started this. I wound up taking the pin out of the exhaust camshaft, but I had to put it back in before we re-pinned the intake camshaft, and it's going to stay that way until we get the timing chain set back right. So we don't want any slack from this gear to this gear once we get it put back on. And we don't want any slack, or I say any slack, as little as we can get from here to here. And then we want as little slack as we can get from the crankshaft timing gear to the intake shaft timing gear. What we want is, that's what this tensioner here is for. That is what's supposed to take up the slop in the chain. And there are torque settings, call outs for this thing right here. We don't want some weebly wobbly chain going from here to here. You know, if it's just slapping around, it might jump a tooth. You know, that could be bad. So chain needs to be fairly tight between from here, this direction, to here, to here. And then the tensioner is what's going to take care of the slack outside of there. But I'm not going to be able to check I'm not going to be able to unpin this motor and recheck these clearances until I get the tensioner back in and I can take this pin out of this down here, and I can spin the motor again. So I'll bring y'all back when I finally get to that point. All right, just put the intake sprocket back on. What it says in the manual to do is make sure that you rotate this so that it is in the center of all these slots, so both the bolts are in the center of their slots and the pin here. We're not going to tighten it down. We're just, right now it's just kind of hand tight. I didn't even really snug it, and they want you to let this settle in as you go through the tensioning process. And right now I'm just reusing the old bolts, but I do have brand new ones to replace these. The new ones have Loctite on them, so and they're pretty cheap. They're like $3 a piece or whatever. Actually, I screwed up here. So with all this stuff in the way, there's no way to get this chain back on this side of this gear. So I got to go back, take this back off, and I'll probably put my tool back on here to make sure that well, crap. Anyways, before you put the valve thrust back on, make sure that this chain is over on this side of your tool, or over the top of it. So I'm gonna have to go back and probably take the thrust back off, take my tool off, move the chain over, put the thrust back on, and then continue. Okay, never mind. I didn't have to take the thrust back off. Remember, this pin is not under tension right now, so I just wound up taking the camshaft back off, or the sprocket back off, and then just very carefully removing this pin. And as soon as I moved it out, I slid the chain past it and then put the pin back in. But I wouldn't want to accidentally hit this or anything like that, because it might take off again. Okay, now that I got that chain back on, you can see whenever I put tension on the timing chain, and when it tightens up, it is, the bolts and the pin are dead center of the, or they look very center of the sprocket here. So I'm gonna snug these back down. Let's see if I can get this on camera. So after I got my chain on this sprocket, then I want to make sure that it is sitting all the way down on this exhaust sprocket. Let's see if I can. Recreate that. Well, I guess I can't. It seems like it's on there pretty good now. So just make sure that the chain is sitting down all the way on the on this sprocket. I had to sit here and like kind of turn it back and forth and wiggle on it to get it to seat down onto the teeth right. So in the service manual, these are the components of the chain, the timing chain tensioner. It says to replace this O-ring, this crush washer, and this sealing washer here. I'll give you the part numbers for those down in the comments or description, whatever you want to call it. Actually, here are the part numbers here. So that guy is this washer here. Here's the crush washer, and then this is the a little O-ring on the tensioner itself. All right, the next step is we have got to arm the chain tensioner, and the way they say they do this in the manual is by using a soft-faced hammer and hit it, and it should go in and stay in, and it shouldn't come back out until we put the it back into the tensioning hole and put the preload plug on there. All right, I just held it in my hand and hit it with the soft face on the hammer. You can see that it is went in and it's staying in. All right, so now this goes back in here very gently. This guy, I haven't changed the O-rings and stuff out yet. I'm gonna wait until after I have remeasured everything. All right, I gotta go look and see what the torque spec is on that, because you gotta torque it down to a certain amount. I'm assuming you should hear the tensioner fire out and engage the chain too as you tighten it. So I wind up having to fish this back out. When it's armed correctly, it should be like that. It should be pretty close. If I found if I try to put it on the table and hit it, it just goes in and comes right back out. And if I wanted to disarm it, I would just tap it again on the table right now. So just holding it in the hand, maybe with some gloves on or a towel or something, that seems to work. You're also going to need a punch that is going to fit, I'm assuming, in that little hole. So what I told you earlier was wrong. The preload plug doesn't extend this. You have to reach in there with a punch and hit it. So let me try that. All right, so I just redeployed it. So I don't see anything on this end that moves. So I think as long as the punch just fits within this little hole here, I think I've got a 3/16 punch. That seems like it fits in there pretty good. Not too big, not too small. So I think just the act of you hitting it is what deploys that. All right, the preload plug needs to be torqued back down to 18.5 Newton meters or 13.64 foot-pounds, and that comes out to 163.68 inch-pounds. Tough to trouble getting in there to hit the punch. You there? All right, I did a dumb earlier, so I wound up taking the tensioner back out and rearming it and then putting it back in, and now I'm going to go through it again. So first time I tried to do it, I tried to use one of these, a punch like this, but it's just, you can't get on it to do anything once you get in there. So I had to go find one of my long punches. In the manual, they show doing this by hand. So you're gonna get it stuck in. What size is this? This is still a 3/16 punch, but it's I don't know, 8 inches long, something like that. So in the manual, they show that you push it in here, kind of find that center. Should be able to find that center hole in the tensioner, and then you can feel it spring whenever you push in on it, and you'll know when it goes. You'll feel it. But I wound up having to take my dead blow hammer and kind of just easily tap on it. But I'm gonna try it again. I'm gonna try to do it by hand this time, just to see if I can do it. If not, then you may have to tap on it with a small hammer. I wouldn't bang on it or anything, but so I was able to get it by hand. I put the camera down, and I had some of these little rubber pads hanging around, and I just kind of held it in my hand and tapped on it with my hand. Kind of hard to do if you don't have big thick gloves or something on. This thing hurts, and like I said, you'll feel it when it deploys, and you can check to make sure that it has tension by coming up here in between the two gears or sprockets and push down on it. If there is no chain tension, then this will rotate forward, because remember, these aren't tight yet. So that's what I'm doing to check and make sure that the chain actually has tension. All right, so now and you can also, whenever you press in on it here, you can feel it has a lot more movement after it deploys. All right, next thing has to go in is this cap along with the new crush washer, and it's going to be tightened to, pull those numbers back up. All right, so it's 20 Newton meters, 14.75 foot-pounds, or 177 inch-pounds. So it's going to go in there. All right, so once I get that done, I need to tighten these two screws here. I think I mentioned it before. If you're doing this, these need to be brand new screws with fresh Loctite on them. They're going to be tightened to 30 Newton meters, or 22.13 foot-pounds. What does that come out to? 22.13 times 12. So that would be 265.5 inch-pounds. After we tighten those two bolts, next thing we gotta do is put this cam chain, or the timing chain shoe, back on. It goes right there. Oh, yep, there. And the cam shoe screws, they get tightened to that same 8.11 foot-pounds, or 11 Newton meters, or 97 something inch-pounds. All right, cam shoes tightened. So now I may have to go turn the crankshaft a little bit, get these tension off these pins, but after you do that, you can take all the pins back out of the motor. All right, with all the pins removed, next step is I'm going to come back over here, and they want you to spin the motor 2 revolutions and make sure that there isn't any binding. So I'm going to do that, check that, and then after I get, After you do the 2 full revolutions, you're supposed to go back and make sure that the pins that you just took out will go back in all 3 holes. So I'm going to do that, and I'm not going to record me going back and rechecking the valve measurements again. Hopefully everything's good and I can start buttoning this thing back up. I don't know how much of that I'm going to show. I'll probably just turn the camera on when I feel like something needs to be shown. Otherwise, it's going to be just the reverse of taking it apart. You know, we should have plenty of footage documenting that. So, but like I said, I'll turn the camera on if I feel like I need to. Okay. All right, that's successful. I wound up having to spin the motor 4 times because I missed this pin the first time, but that pin went back in, that pin went back in, and that pin went back in. All right. So in my case, I need to go get my feeler gauges, recheck my clearances, and then decide if I'm ready to start putting this thing back together.